Good evening and welcome to the Palomares Adobe Museum. I'm Mike Showalter, resident host and caretaker. Last fall, the Historical Society presented its first ever webinar on the Chapel of Ricardo Vejar and one of the historic paintings that we're working to preserve. Unfortunately, being our first webinar, we forgot to hit the record button. We are trying to fill in the spaces of the missing information so that we can post this information and this webinar for future generations. Before we get started, I would like to specifically thank the people who donated money for the preservation of the Madonna painting from the Vejar Chapel, specifically the Native Sons of the Golden West, who gave us a $5,000 matching grant that really made this all possible. We are very appreciative and want to thank them for their support of this project. So moving forward, let's start the presentation. The Chapel of Ricardo Vejar, Pomona's first church, and the restoration of the Madonna painting. This map shows the ranchos that were located in Los Angeles in the early 1800s that had been given out by the governor of Mexico. Now, in order to be able to make all of these land grants, Mexico first had to take back the land from the California missions that had been granted to them by the King of Spain. That happened with the decree of secularization, which occurred in 1834, and then gave the governor the land to be able to start giving out to friends and supporters of Mexico, of the newly independent Mexico. In 1837, Ignacio Palomares and Ricardo Vejar applied for a land grant and received 15,000 acres of what would become the Rancho San Jose. Now, this is in the far eastern part of Los Angeles County. On the ranch, their herds flourished. And in 1844, Ricardo Vejar, who was considered to be one of the most successful ranchers and one of the richest men in Los Angeles County, bought the Rancho Los Nogales, which was next to his section of the Rancho San Jose. He then, in 1844, began construction of a new home for his family. And while no photographs of that home exist today, this sketch plan was done back in 1936 by historian Ray Fryer and Vejar's grandson, Jose Vejar. House was built in a quadrangle with a flat roof and a large patio area in the center for entertaining and fiestas. There were many adobe rooms, but most importantly, in the lower left-hand corner, we can see the capilla, or the chapel. Religion was a very important part of the daily life of the early ranchos, and they would have morning prayers and evening vespers, and on Sundays and all church holidays, they would get together with friends and family in other people's homes. However, it was Ricardo Vejar that first built a room dedicated to worship. And his chapel was then consecrated by the church, the Catholic Church, so that the priests could offer the sacrament of Holy Communion. Thus, being consecrated, it technically became Pomona's first church. Now, Ricardo Vejar died in 1882, and because of a dispute with the Southern Pacific Railroad over the land he had built his house on, shortly after his family leaving the house, it was torn down. As is with many of the traditions of those days, family heirlooms moved on to the next generation, and in this case, they moved on to Ricardo's son, Ramon Vejar. He received many of the treasures from his father's chapel, as well as many of the records in terms of baptisms and marriages and other things that were actually services that were actually performed. Unfortunately, in 1918, Ramon's house caught fire, and many priceless relics were lost. Now, fortunately, when the smoke cleared, it wasn't as many as this article had reported. And in 1940, when the Palomares Museum opened, the Vejar family, specifically Miss Estelle Vejar, granddaughter of Ricardo Vejar, donated many of the family heirlooms to the Palomares Museum. This is a copy of the scrapbook from that time, and we can see the Madonna painting on the wall, but we can also see the distressed condition that it's in. This is a recent photo. We can see the lines from where the painting had been folded and put in a smaller frame. The painting still also has smoke damage as well as blistering from that fire back in 1918. Now, in 1907, at one point, Dr. Palmer, the Southwest Museum, looked at some of the art that Vejar had in his chapel and declared that this painting of the Madonna was Murillo by the famous Spanish artist, and that in those days it would be, if it had been taken to Europe to be sold, it would have been worth $60,000, which in today's money is $1.5 million. Unfortunately, Dr. Palmer was incorrect in his assessment and identification of the painting. We know now that it is not a Murillo. However, we do have with us an expert in the field of Spanish colonial artwork who can help us and tell us more about the painting and the restoration of this historic piece from the Vejar Chapel. So at this point, I would like to introduce Mr. Scott Haskens of the Fine Arts Conservation Labs in Santa Barbara. Scott, take it away.
So the Spanish colonial art is usually from about 1650 through about through the beginning of the 1800s, and this is one of the first actually Spanish colonial pieces that I worked on. This belonged to the Iberian Institute out of Santa Fe, and when I came back to the United States from Europe, I got a chance to begin working on this. And this is if you're tying timelines together, Spanish colonial art is basically our version, the New World version of Baroque art. And so you can see that if you're comparing this to the golden age of Spain, it is it's primitive. It's not gonna be, but this was what was in the New World, and this is what, of course, appealed to the new converts, the religion as it grew in the Western Hemisphere. This belongs to Santa Barbara Museum. So this is a great project that we had a few years ago down in Mission San Juan Capistrano. This had been hidden from view for 40 or 50 years. They forgot they even had it, and then someone rediscovered it. But that was very exciting. And what was cool is that it had been reduced in size to get it into this frame. And when we got it out of the frame and were able to see that there was part of it wrapped around, there was the signature and the date by the original artist. So anyway, that was great. So anyway, now the reason I bring this up is because the Vejar Ranch has a couple of quality Spanish colonial items that these buildings and these collections have been considered and are labeled as national treasures. It's an important part of our national heritage in the United States. And so I don't think you should underestimate the value and the quality of the artwork that you have in the collection, because as I'm going to show you right now, this artwork that we're talking about tonight belongs in these missions, belongs as part of this storytelling process, which is so important not only for California, but for Western United States. And actually, because the excitement or the popularity of this style and this artwork was so diffused, like I said before, it turned into the mission style, which was an arts and crafts movement, and that has gone international, but certainly national for us in the United States. And so it's not just like one painting, okay, well, that was kind of, somebody who spoke Spanish. No, this whole vibe moved out and touched everyone's lives. There were only three artists that walked or rode around to each of the missions and painted each of the missions on site. There are 21. Actually, they're not all finished, cool looking missions like this. Some of them were agricultural centers where they were raising flocks and had agricultural things going in order to feed the missions. So like La Purísima in Lompoc was mostly an agricultural center, but it's listed as one of the missions. So anyway, this painting is by Edwin Deacon. and he went around to each of the missions and painted them. And of course, they were all full of and a part of that movement that influenced architecture, influenced a lot of like I said, what we call the mission style. So I was brought to the Mission Inn in Riverside. I don't know how many of you have been there. You have to go there. It's a cultural experience. It's a great place to go and to step away from from reality. It's just a great place to go. And I was called in after it had been the city's white elephant closed down, locked down, and had a chain link fence around it. And I was brought in by the foundation, by people that were getting it started again. And we went up through, and in a place like this, full of pigeon poop, we found lots of artwork. And a lot of the artwork we found were all of the missions that were painted by Henry Chapman Ford. And these were found up on Pigeon Row and up in the attic. And you can see this painting has already been restored 3 times and repainted. And you can still see what kind of condition I found it in. It had been exposed to more water. And so this is San Diego de Acala. And you can see it didn't like being exposed to water either. And here it is. The sky has been repainted a couple of times. It's it was in pretty bad shape. Here you go, San Francisco de Assisi, with the paint peeling off of it because of exposure to water. And this is La Purissima, and it also has the damage along the left-hand side because of water. So here's a piece missing, in fact, that was gone. So here's the Santa Barbara mission. The sky's been repainted a couple of times. These, you can see on the left-hand side, there's some monkey business going on, and texture and reflections. That's all been flaked off and repainted. These were in pretty rough shape. And so we stabilized all of this, and PBS did a special on us as we took care of all these paintings. And it aired, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, and we got a big award for it. And it was really, these paintings have been labeled a national treasure. And of course, the artwork that you have is all part of this same movement, the same notoriety. And so the Missions of California by Henry Chapman Ford. And here on the top is what it looked like when we got done with it, back to its original colors. And here at the bottom part, it's pea soup green by the way it was repainted and dirtied up. And here is La Purissima looking at its best. And San Francisco de Assisi, you'll remember the left-hand side was all busted up. And Mission San Juan Capistrano, looking good. Here is the main Spanish art gallery in the Mission Inn. Doesn't look like this today. This is back in I think the teens or 20s. But this is where many of these mission paintings by Henry Chapman Ford are now hanging. I personally redesigned this entire room, and because all of this artwork was taken out, and this was just a shell when we reconnected with the Mission Inn and started restoring hundreds of works of art and bringing back to life their Spanish colonial collection. This is your Madonna and Child, cleaned up, and is she pretty? And I want you to kind of see what this looks like, and then we're going to blow by a bunch of Spanish colonial stuff. This is stuff that Stacy Roman does when he's evaluating something. He looks at your painting and then he compares it to a bunch of other stuff. So we're going to do kind of what he does. And we're going to compare this painting, and you're going to compare it with the quality of the other things that I've got to show you here. Okay, so this will help you understand really how good and how lucky you are with the things that you have. So the one on the left, of course, is very nicely done, but the one on the right has got some real rough things going. Both of these, you can see the face of this Madonna is pretty goofy, and the guys on the right hand side. A lot of these paintings that were brought to the New World were done in workshops. Okay. And my thought is that even though the painting that you have is really is nice, it is not Murillo. And he was one of the greats of the Spanish Golden Era. But I was in Seville a couple of years ago, and it's well known the fact that they had a workshop that were cranking out paintings faster than McDonald's makes hamburgers. And they were shipping all this artwork over to the by the hundreds to all the chapels and all the ranchers and all the everybody in the New World. And this probably went on for 150 years. So obviously Murillo didn't paint all that stuff, but it had his name on it. And so it's kind of his brand, I guess. And while this is nicely done, I'm not sure how many of us would like to have a mustached nun in our front room. But anyway, you can see that sometimes the storytelling was the most important thing, even though the quality of the painting was not so great. But this is what your Madonna looked like before we started cleaning her. And but the whole process of bringing her back to life and preserving her for future generations, getting a beautiful frame on her, and the paintings that you have, is an opportunity, really. I mean, the Sons of the Golden West, ultimately a fantastic organization. I hope they will be forever recognized as a benefactor for the Vejar Chapel, the Vejar Ranch, and Adobe, and be accredited with preserving and restoring the heritage of this organization. And you might think about also being part of that recognition, letting your family's heritage and identity be connected with the saving of California history and at the Adobe. So the Adobe was founded in 1837. And I already mentioned that Bartolomé Esteban Murillo from Sevilla was probably a great influence, but probably didn't put his brush on your painting. So these are the two main paintings that we're discussing. Still looking for money for St. John on the right. We're working on the painting of the Madonna and the Christ Child on the left, but still looking to put a fantastic frame on her and on both of them. So this is, you can see in this photograph from 1940, that she was already damaged badly, and so that's that's an interesting thing. She was flaking actively when we got her, and so the first thing we did was look to stabilize that flaking. There's two parts to the profession of art conservation. Those two parts are, one is stabilizing the condition, making sure that even if it's going to last, that it lasts for another 100 years, let's say, for another couple of generations. And we could, for instance, stabilize this condition so that it doesn't flake, it doesn't get any worse over the next generation, couple of generations or 100 years, but it could still look awful. And that's where the second part comes in, where part of the restoration is that of carefully cleaning and making sure that that's taken care of, but also doing the in-painting or the touch-up and closing all of those areas that have lost original detail. The painting on the right is a raking light, and that raking light helps us to see all the distortions, folds, crimps, and losses that are in the painting before we work on it. Now, a couple of interesting things as we were cleaning these paintings, if you look, you can see a very slight image of a crown on the top of the Christ Child's head. Can you see that? That actually wraps around the head a little bit too. This is in ultraviolet light, and you can see that actually the paint of this crown is it's cracked. And it's, I don't know, I think it may have been altered in the fire, or maybe someone was trying to clean up after the fire. They took it off. I've done some research and checked in with the Franciscan archives, looked at a bunch of stuff, and I can't find, and the archives director wasn't aware of any crown on any painting that had this style or looked like this. So we're not sure. Before the painting was worked on, you really couldn't see it. And you can see on the Madonna, there's a slight shadow of, if you can see that right at the very top of her head, there's kind of a slight shadow of a crown for her too, if you can see that. And then, and you also couldn't see the rays of glory that are now very visible from, coming out of her head. And so that was a really nice detail that that you really couldn't see very much. You can see a little bit coming out the one side, but once we got it cleaned, they came out really nicely. We haven't really decided whether we're going to keep the crowns or not. And but one of the other interesting things is, and this is the ultraviolet light that gives us a whole different way of identifying paint, helps us to see previous restorations, helps us understand what's original and what isn't, helps us, as you can see, we can see cracking patterns with this light that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And if you are a collector of art, a due diligence, an important due diligence thing that you must do is carry a little UV blacklight flashlight with you and look at things. And I can help you understand what you're looking at a little bit better. So this is the bottom right-hand side of the picture. And as we got it cleaned, all of a sudden, palm tree appeared. And you can see that. Hold on a second. So that palm tree appeared. That is something that I have seen in other paintings and is iconographic. So maybe we'll think about keeping that. And there we go. All right. So this is what the painting looked like. Actually, the one on the left is your painting before we cleaned it. And actually, that's a little better than it really looked. It had been cleaned, I think, previously. Mike mentioned that it hadn't been restored before, but I think when they made it bigger and smaller and that kind of thing, they probably, wiped it down with a mop and hit it with some varnish. And I'm sure that after the fire, somebody probably went after it, trying to make it look a little bit better. But these on the right-hand side are more in line with the original colors of the painting, and it's stabilized now and it's cleaned. And you can see the palm tree in that lower right-hand side, how nice and evident it is. And those details are really fun, interesting art historical details that we have refound or rediscovered. The beauty of the picture and her face is just beautiful, and it's a nice, very, very nice image. Of course, can't ever have too many putti or cherubs, but there we go. All right, so a couple of things that we did, as you can see, the edges were so eaten up by fire and by putting it on and taking it off of the wooden frame that it'd been chewed up, and now we've backed all of that. There's a lining on it which reinforces the backside, and that will now be forever strengthened and will not rip apart anymore, and gives us a solid background so that we can make that look perfect. And here we are getting ready. She's doing a little bit of in painting, Julie is, and in fact, I've got just a little bit, there we go, a little bit of video, and bring you up top. So I just want you to notice what's written here along the bottom. People ask me, well, they call me an artist, like you're such an artist. And I'm not an artist at all. I've never painted a painting in my life. We don't even have a tube of oil paint in the lab. And everything that we do is to preserve the original nature of the artwork. It is to preserve and protect things for future generations. You do not want to see the signature of whoever the artist is, and then my name after his at the bottom right-hand corner of the picture. In fact, I kind of characterize the work that we do as kind of ninja conservation. If I've done my job right, you can't tell I've even been there. And so that's the idea of our work. Ours is the application of science to the preservation of art. There is nothing creative about what we're doing. You can see that as badly as this is damaged along here, you can see that just with a small spotting brush, look at the size of the brush she's using. It's super small. It's like got 5 hairs on it. And she's just dotting in the color and color matching it. There's no creativity. There's no repainting at all. So don't call me an artist. Otherwise, I'll have to explain that all to you again because I'm very sensitive about it. All right, here you go. These are a couple more paintings. The one on the right has been damaged by water, and we can fix that and reestablish that. And the one on the left has a ding in it and some cracks and other things, and it's been repainted. But Mike, do you want to talk about some of the other things that you have at the Adobe that are in need of TLC?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so yes, we were very fortunate when the Adobe opened in 1940. As Scott has mentioned, not only did we get the painting of the Madonna from the Vejar family, but we also got this painting of St. John the Baptist. Its condition is not as bad as the Madonna, but it still is in desperate need of restoration. You can see some of the distortion in it and the dirt. Remember, this is Orange County, or this is Los Angeles, and for years and years we had smudge pots running in the orchards every time it looked like it was going to freeze. So,
well, Mike, let me interrupt you quickly. It doesn't look like it's in as bad a condition as the Madonna because there isn't a bunch of paint missing, but
right.
but it's been repainted. I mean, grossly repainted 3 or 4 times. So it's a mess.
It needs it too. Okay, excellent. Got it. Okay, so this was one of the pieces that came from the chapel. We also and these were donated by Miss Estella Vejar, who was a granddaughter of Ricardo Vejar. And here is our statue of St. Joseph, the patron saint of the Rancho San Jose. Now, it's said that Ricardo Vejar had this statue carved specifically for his chapel in Italy back in the 1850s, but it also went through that terrible fire in 1918, and we believe, in fact, at one point was repainted. So this is another piece of work that Scott might get his hands on at some point.
We just finished up 3 statues like this for Mission San Juan Capistrano. Of course,
excellent.
Working on the painted layers.
Okay, so you're ready to go with it then. Excellent. But just to point out on the left-hand picture here, that is Miss Vejar. She kept this statue and a couple of the other artifacts from the chapel in her own home until she passed away in 1958. This is actually a picture of her lighting the candle on her 83rd birthday in 1954. So we were very thrilled when we actually got it. And if you see down at St. Joseph's feet is the Missal Romanum, the mass book that came from the chapel. Somebody cheated at some point and wrote 1751 for those who can't read Roman numerals down there. It also was leather bound and on parchment and is also in desperate need of restoration. Yeah, we should not be opening and closing that book at all. Here's one piece from the chapel that doesn't need restoration. This is actually the key that was found in the ruins of Ricardo's adobe after the family had abandoned it. So that's one part that we don't have to work with. Okay, so those are things that are part of the Historic Society's collection. And we know of some other things that we think are out there, and we want to look at those now. But to do that, we need to go back in time, and I need to introduce you to Father Juan Caballera, who was a Spanish priest that came to California in 1888. Now, Father Caballera developed an interest in the old Spanish missions. So if you remember, I talked about how Mexico had taken their land and shut the missions down. And it was Father Caballera who started going around from church to church and rancho to rancho. And it became his labor of love to hunt down and collect the artwork and relics that had been scattered when the missions were closed and pillaged. Okay? Ultimately, Father Caballera's collection of 34 paintings was acquired by the Southwest Society of the Archaeological Institute of America. That organization was then the founders of the Southwest Museum here in Los Angeles. And the Caballera collection of paintings became one of their first assets. And in 1904, Charles Fletcher Loomis, a very notable character in Southern California history, wrote about the Caballera collection in his magazine Out West. And in the article, he raves about this painting on the left here, titled Madonna of the Ring, and he called it the one notable painting which stands preeminent. Then Loomis also goes on to talk about this painting, which is St. John of Nepomuc, the martyr. And I have to apologize for the quality of this painting, but it's the only known image of that painting that we could find. But going back to Mr. Loomis's article, he talks about this painting, and he writes that no one is sure how or when St. John came to California, but that the painting was, quote, the chief ornament in the private chapel of a famous California family near Pomona. His veiled reference to the Vejar Chapel is what's important here. And if we go back to our article on the 1918 fire at the Vejar home, as you get into it, in the article, the family is talking about the relics that were lost, but they find comfort in the fact that their father's best paintings, Madonna of the Ring and St. John of Nepomuc, had already been hanging in the Southwest Museum for some time. So what this tells us is that while Ricardo Vejar has always been reported to have purchased all of his artwork for his chapel from the old world, had the statue carved in Italy, it now appears that he also managed to acquire some of the loot that had been pillaged from the missions when they were closed. In 2003, the Southwest Museum merged with the Autry Museum, and I was able to find this picture of Madonna of the Ring. It's just a beautiful image, and unfortunately, since COVID has hit, they've taken this picture down, and I can't find it anymore. But when you dig through a little further into their archives, they do have a listing of the Caballari collection, and they do mention the painting of St. John. So one of our goals in the near future, hopefully, is talk to the Autry and see if it wouldn't be possible to get pictures of this so that we could create copies of both the Madonna of the Ring and St. John of Nepomuc that we could then hang in our museum along with the other paintings and help work to recreate what was the chapel of Ricardo Vejar, our first church in Pomona. Okay, so we know that that's up at the Autry. We know what we have in our collection. Now we get to talk about relics that came from the chapel that we're, fingers crossed, are hoping are still around. And we're going to start with chapel bells. Ricardo Vejar hung a large chapel bell in the tree next to his chapel to bring people to worship. He also had a set of smaller bells that he would ring. And in 1921, there was actually an article here in the Pomona Progress Bulletin that talked about the bells being exhibited and actually names of the family members who owned the bells at that time. Problem is, that was 100 years ago. So where those bells are today, well, that's another search that we have to work on. But chapel bells are one of the other features that we think still exists. An altar chalice. We've also read in several newspaper articles information of, mentions of the chalice from the Vejar Chapel. Not necessarily, that would be our Holy Grail, and also altar cloths that are possibly still in existence, but we don't know for sure where they are. It's not our intention, let me just say, to find the descendants that hold these pieces and strong arm them into donating them to us, but we would very much like to see them, to take pictures of them so that we can add to our records so that we know as much as we possibly can about this first church and the chapel and what exists there. So where do we go from here? Our first objective is going to be to raise money to restore the painting of St. John the Baptist that came from the chapel. We also then, as I mentioned, are very anxious to talk to the Autry Museum, because not only do we believe that they have those paintings from the chapel, but that there may be other artifacts from the Vejar as well as the Palomares family that were donated to the Southwest Museum. And so we're, again, very anxious to know what exactly exists out there anymore. Father Cavalieri kept very extensive notes when he was on his search for the artwork from the missions. And so we would very much like to find his journals. So, because he would probably be the only one to have ever created any sort of written documentation about the Vejar Chapel and what was in it and what it was like. So yes, we need to find those. To find those, we're probably going to need to search the mission, the archives of the California missions, as well as the Los Angeles Plaza Church, the oldest church in Los Angeles, where Father Cavalieri actually served, as well as our own St. Joseph's Church here in Pomona. When it was founded back in the 1870s, many of their first members were actually Vejars and Palomares. And so we'd like to know what they've got. And as I said, identifying family heirlooms that are still owned by the descendants so that we can at least keep records of the items that are out there and of these historic heirlooms and relics. So, and in order to accomplish all of that, we need your support. We need help with anybody who knows, how to contact some of these places. We need financial donations. And here's some contact information that I'm sure you will see again. And that would be the end of my presentation.